أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين أبي القاسم محمد وآل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين صلوات please اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أم يحسدون الناس على ما آتاهم الله من فضله فقد آتينا آل إبراهيم الكتاب والحكمة وآتيناهم ملكا عظيما صلوات. Or are the people jealous out of what Allah has granted some out of His grace? Surely we have given the family of Ibrahim the book and the wisdom, and we have given them a great kingdom. When we're having this discussion of the revolution of Imam Hussein, it's very important for us to take into account why he launched his revolution, and also what we can learn from it. And there's very many lessons that you can learn from this period. One of my teachers once told me that if you want to see Islam over a lifetime, you look at the example of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. If you want to see Islam expanded over generations, you look at all of the A'imma alayhim as-salam. But if you want to see Islam in one day, you look at the example of Aba Abdullah Hussein alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And in this discussion of Imam Hussein, we have different nazariyat, different theories. Some of them are Shia theories, which are more or closer to the correct, because we want to get a theory which is as comprehensive as possible, because everybody is going to have a slightly different take and no one is going to be perfect. Some of the Shia theories are a little bit off the mark. We have some Shia theories which are a little bit closer, and we have some of the theories of other madhahib that are closer, and some of the theories which are a little bit further. So in this discussion, they have what presented itself in the time of Imam Hussein. And one of the theories which we want to say is, was Imam Hussein acting differently than any of the other A'imma? Did he have, obviously Allah is going to give the most perfect of perfect personalities and akhlaq and look and everything for the perfect situation. But the overall scheme of any one of the prophets or any one of the imams, we want to say is the same, meaning Islam is one. It's not that one was different than the other. So first we want to look at this part. And some say, well, Imam Hassan alayhi salam was more loving peace and Imam Hussein was more loving war. And when we look at it from our perspective, we say no, they were basically Nur and Wahid. From any one of the imams would act like the other, any one of the other imams in the different time. Whichever you put in that, plug and play, you know. Maybe there's going to be some tiny fazayil. So at one time, people maybe need to see an imam who looks a little like this or a little bit like that, and some whatever with Allah is knowing. But from what we can understand, it would be the same. So Some people are saying no, the opposite. And so it's worthwhile to look at this to see, is that actually true? Instead of just saying, oh, well, this is our belief, this is our aqidah, and we won't even go and verify, is this the same or is it just our belief is wrong? So when we verify, then we can see and we look at the circumstances. So we have the circumstances of some of the earlier ai the two imams who came before, which is Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And we have the example of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And the khulafa, or the leaders of the Muslims in the previous times. And we see that what's very interesting is these three imams all made their case for why they should have the right to lead the Muslims. A very important point that sometimes just gets looked over when people are looking. They say, and then they were Razi. I remember I was younger, and I've told you brothers before this same story, that I was raised Sunni. And I remember the story quite clearly, and we're reading through, and we're like learning the history as we're reading. So my mother, she gets the book and reading life of the Prophet, and it comes to the life of, the death of the Prophet. And we just sort of assume, we knew that Abu Bakr became the first Khalifa, so we assumed that the argument he would make would be, I was the first Muslim, and I was this, and I was this, and I was this, and I have more right over the rest of the people. But then when it came to it, they have Saqifa Sa'adiyah, he says, I'm from the Quraysh, and you should accept me just on that basis. They say any one of the Quraysh should be the Khalifa. That's actually what their argument was. It wasn't even that Abu Bakr is the best, it was just, that wasn't his argument. He was like, choose anybody from the Quraysh. You can choose Omar, or you can choose Abu Ubaidah al-Jarrah, or you can choose me or whoever, just as long as it's from the Quraysh, because we have special right. What people don't realize is the verse which I just read, he's referring to that. The family of Ibrahim. He's trying to make the claim, which was the same claim as the people of Jahiliyyah, that we are the family of Ibrahim and we have a special right over the rest of the people. So that he was basically making a predated claim. And then, even in the Sunni books, Imam Ali says, well then if you have some right, then I have more right than you do. That you argued with the tree and forgot the fruit. And I remember my mother, she's reading through this, and she got shook. I remember her making basically, yeah, that's right. And she couldn't really, she was like, well, I don't know then, And then the person who's in the history book, the explainer, the historian himself, he says, but then Imam Ali was okay with it. So then she's like, well, I guess if he was okay with it, then I guess he was okay with it. Of course, leaving out the parts of, the whole, that he's making a complaint for months on end, and he's putting pressure, and he didn't accept, and they came to his house, and all of that type of stuff. In the book that I had, it was really like a juzve. I mean, it was like a pretty thin book. Then when you read the other ones, it actually goes into detail. One of the ones that she read later, but because we didn't read it all together, it wasn't in the book about Abu Bakr, it was actually about Omar. They go into details about how Imam Ali was convinced to accept Abu Bakr. Meaning they set his house on fire. But in the book, at the time it wasn't. So we kind of didn't make the connection. Then later I'm reading the Shia book, the exact same story, except that it puts all the pieces together. Instead of having to kind of go and get pieces, the Sunni story and the Shia story were the same. Actually, in some cases, the Sunni story was more hard on the Ashab than the Shia story was. Like the Shia story said that they came to the house with fire. The Sunni story said they set it on fire. Meaning it was worse. It was more extreme. I think the Shia story said they came out and got disarmed. That I think it said Zubair came out with weapons. The Sunni story said that Zubair and Amir al-Mu'mineen came out armed. I'm like, it turned into a total mess when you actually went through the detail. So the wider point being that he actually asserted his right, that this is my right, and I'm not okay with you violating that. And then he only backed down once it got to the point that if there was a civil war with the Muslims and he didn't have overwhelming force, that he could fight back, but it wouldn't be overwhelming force. It would just be skirmishing in the street or something. So you don't win a battle like that. They call it in fighting, they call it a Pyrrhic victory. I win, but I lose so many people in the process, there's nothing left to win. And at the time, these Musaylima al-Kadhab and Sajjah and all of these people started turning back on the religion. And so he could either save the religion and just say, look, okay, it's that important to you. You want to be in charge? As long as you're following the rules, you can be in charge. I'm not going to fight you for the chair. And I'll press my claim later. And they actually sort of expressed this. I believe this is, I'm not 100% certain. I think it's in a Sunni book that Imam Hassan alayhi salam came to Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, came to Abu Bakr and said, why are you sitting in my father's chair? And he said, yes, it is your father's chair, and started crying. Meaning the claim was out there and people knew. Then we went to the next one, and Imam Ali is accepting them and accepting them and accepting them, all for, you can say, what appears to be the greater good. Then you have to take the case of Imam Hassan alayhi salam. He actually took power. He actually sat in the seat of government and then backed down. He said, well, he backed down to Muawiyah, and Muawiyah was not on the level, at least the other ones could claim to be Muhajirin, could claim to have accepted Islam not by force. How could he back down to Muawiyah? And then you have to look at the greater good issue again. From the time of Uthman, there was the people actually came in and killed their own leader. Meaning that's going to open up the door to fitna, that this is a way of getting a person out of power. As soon as you do that, whether they're good or bad, it doesn't matter, but you can't have that be the case. Because at least if you surrender, then there's some sort of democratic process still there. But if you go and you allow yourself to be killed on the mimbar, then it actually creates a whole bag of worms. Then they had the Battle of Jamal. Then they had fighting in Egypt with Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr and Amr ibn al-As. They had the Siffin. They had Nahrawan. So the Muslims were their numbers were just like being depleted by fighting amongst themselves. Sahaba were getting killed. People who knew what the Prophet had said were getting killed. The children of people who knew what the Prophet had actually said were being killed. So the deen started being lost just by actual attrition. Like so many of them died that their numbers were just dwindling. Then when you compound it, neither the Irani Empire nor the Roman Empire were completely gone. There was still remnants of the Irani Empire in the far reaches of what's now like Afghanistan. Those guys were still out there. They hadn't given up. They were still trying to reclaim their power. The Roman Empire was strong, meaning they had lost Damascus, which is the seat of their power, but Constantinople was still there. If the Muslims did another wave of 15 years of fighting between themselves, the Romans would have come back in, took back over. Remember, the majority of the Sham was still Christian at this time. Egypt was majority Christian. Muslims disunited, they fight another 15, 20-year war. Rome comes back in, all that momentum is lost. And they lose. Persia comes back in, and now the Muslims are going to be fighting on two fronts, and then with all these schisms, and with also not the quality of people of the previous generation. So the situation of the greater good had not changed. So he asserted his right, but when he saw that trying to get the right guy into the chair versus the greater good, then he said, well, okay, you know what? Islam will be lost. So now we come to the example of Imam Hussein. Now this is where a couple of things had started to happen. People started to take this interpretation that the Imam basically had to back down. So there was, you can say that Imam Hussein, when Yazid took the chair, he was now different than the other, let's say, 1, 2, 3, 4 people who would come before him, right? He had never met the Prophet, so he couldn't claim that I'm Sahaba, right? He also didn't have any sort of faza'il, meaning at least the other people said, well, they did this, that, or the other. He hadn't really done anything. He also was clearly not even outwardly respectful of the religion, that you could make the case that he was to be in charge. His father had specifically said he would not put him in charge and that he would go back to the shura of the Muslims. So there was a lot going against him. And the Muslims had already accepted, and this was already the Arab tradition, that you didn't have these ghasbi leaders, meaning you didn't take power by force. Even amongst the Arab tribes, if Abu Jahl wanted to be in charge, Abu Jahl didn't force himself onto the other people. He would come and say, I would like my son to be in charge, but you guys make your own decision, meaning that they would have some sort of shura, the tribal council would pick, and then those people would come up with some sort of resolution. We even see this, like that when they were trying to do something against Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, none of the tribes just went berserk on their own. They would even bring Abu Talib in when they're making this discussion to try to exclude him. So this was their system. So now, they're now bringing in basically what's a bid'ah to the Arabs, meaning you're just going to have nasb, that you're just going to force somebody onto the rest of the people and we don't get a vote, we don't have a say-so, not even the leaders, not even the best of the best. So this was also another issue with him. Even if he had been righteous, that even Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, he didn't force Imam Hassan on the people. He said, this is the son of the Prophet, this is my wasi. And then Imam Hassan actually made a speech, talked about the fada'il of the Ahl Bayt, and then the people came forward and made bay'ah to him. The same for Amir al-Mu'mineen. That with we know the whole, we say that the last part of it, you know, alastu awla bikum bi anfusakum, or that do I not have more right over you than you have over your own selves? And then the people answer yes. And then he says the part, فَمَنْ كُنْتُ مَوْلَاهُ فَهَذَا عَلِيٌّ مَوْلَاهُ. Please give a salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Then he asked the people to make bay'ah. He didn't force them. He said, now come make bay'ah. And then the people did it. And they could have said no. But they had already said that you have more right. And they made the exchange. He could have said, no, we don't accept. But they already accepted. And so then, therefore, it went on. So there was a few ways that when you had this person who's breaking the Arab tradition and breaking the Islamic tradition, like he was breaking the Arab tradition of shura, he was breaking what had been accepted amongst the Muslims of some sort of consensus, and he was also not righteous even in their standards, even at the standards of the time, which they said that it should be a mu'min person from the Quraysh. He was not even fitting that standard. So now, Imam Hussein alayhi salam was faced with, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, was faced with a couple of different things that he could do. Well, first of all, he could have been silent. I don't say anything about it. Even that they didn't accept. They said, no, you have to come and make bay'ah publicly. So they didn't even accept that he be silent. The second thing, he could be treacherous, right? He could say that I'm going to make bay'ah, make bay'ah, get himself covered, and then begin working in the shadows to try to organize a result. But it's very interesting, we don't see the Prophet or the Imams doing this sort of sneaky double tricks and a trick on a trick on a trick, and I make bay'ah, then actually I go to his house and give him some poison and that type of thing. So that's not in the sunnah of the Prophet to do this way of dealing. Go and make a deal with, like we see these other governments. We have stories that he go to the Romans and get the aid of the Romans to help him attack Yazid or something like. There's treachery and usually this results in a disaster. That's how the Muslims lost Spain. This one is doing that and that one is doing this and this one is conspiring with this Christian leader and that one's conspiring with that Christian leader until finally the Christians overpowered, So that's how they lost it. He could support Yazid. Say, well, you know what? I'm gonna get killed anyway, so I may as well collect the dunya. You know how some people are. That's how they think. So this is an option. He could come out in an open revolt. Just charge out, not even give Yazid a chance, and come out with the sword. He could do hijrah. He offered this. He said, look, if you guys don't want me to, you don't accept my silence, you don't accept me to rule, or you don't accept the shura of the Muslims, then at least let me go to another land. Right? What's very interesting is that he actually refused. The thing he did was he refused to cooperate. And this set a very different precedent from the other leaders of the Muslims at the time. Because there was a few other leaders, and some of them said that we're just going to, hey, we accept whatever the leader it is, good or bad or whatever, we'll accept it. Right? So they waited and they made bay'ah. Other ones fled. We ran away. They didn't make hijrah. They didn't do this openly. This sort of meaning they're being deceptive. Imam Hussein made a clear stance to make it clear to the people that this was not acceptable in Islam. And I'm going to read you some very interesting hadith from Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Please give us salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. This is one. Qala Imam Hussein, Fale Umri, by my life, Ma al-Imam illa hakimun bil-kitab, qa'imun bil-qist, da'inu bid-din al-haq, habisu nafsahu ala dhatillah. That what is an imam, and here, he's talking about himself and the role of the imam, is not just to be a mu'min person in his own kahf, in his own cave, but it's actually to implement the rules of Allah on the earth, on himself and on the others, meaning that he is bound by the rules of Allah. But also not just himself, but any imam. Not just some people imagine just the Imam Ma'soom has to do this thing. No, any person who is going to be an imam and a leader and have this responsibility is going to be a person who the rules of Allah are over him. Because people were starting to think that whatever the imam said, meaning imam not in our meaning, imam in the leader of the mu'min, sultan, imam in the meaning of sultan, imam in the meaning of khalifa, imam in the meaning of person who has sitting in the throne of power, whatever he says is the deen. He can make stuff, he can change the rules, he can make this halal, he can make that haram. They were starting to get that impression. If Imam Hussein didn't stand up and didn't fight back, but this is also a very, very interesting precedent, which if you look at other adyan and other peoples, you know how now we have in America, we have the belief that the law is over the president. Meaning if the president, let's say the president speeds, and a police officer stops him, the president has to take the ticket. He can't say, I'm the president in this country. So we're seeing that this is actually before that, saying, no, the law and the constitution and the rules are higher than the president. Not that the president can say what the rules, no, that the rules say what the president can do, not that the president says what the rules are. So the imam is bound by the laws. He can't go past them. So a very interesting precedent that he's making, because other people would have thought that. He says another thing which is very interesting. قال الإمام حسين عليه السلام اللهم صل على محمد وعلى إن مجاري الأمور والأحكام على الأيدي العلماء بالله والأمناء على حلاله وحرامه. Now, some people take this in the meaning and they start talking about maraja taqlid and things like that, but or the A'imma al-Athar. But also, this isn't just that, it's for us too. Meaning when I am aware of what the rules of Allah are, and I am aware of what is in the maslahah of the Muslims, it's my duty to speak out and make this known. I can't let the entire deen get lost. Sometimes there's times where like it's an individual issue. You're doing immediate personal self-protection, you can do taqiyya. But if the deen is going to be lost because of your silence, it's not allowable to be silent at that time. This is actually in it's in Shia books and Sunni books. The one that I have is from the Musnad of Ahmed ibn Hanbal. That one of the companions came to the Prophet and Sa'ala, Ayya jihadin afdal. What type of jihad is the best? Qala Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa alim. Kalimatu haqqin inda sultanin ja'ir. That you speak out for the truth in front of a corrupt leader. So, Imam Hussein is making a few key points. One, the Quran and Sunnah is worth defending. Not just some amorphous justice. No, the Quran and Sunnah is worth defending. Justice itself, adl, is worth defending. You can't just let it disappear, because it's hard to stand up and it's easy to go. Wilayat of the Ahl al-Bayt is worth defending. It's not some amorphous concept. Oh yeah, we just love them. No, their right to rule and their proper place in leading the Muslims as the most righteous people and the closest to the Prophet and the knowledgeable of the Prophet is worth defending. Silence of those who are aware is not allowable. Taqiyya in the face of destruction of deen is not allowable. People would not have known. Even the Wahhabis, who they take it a little too far, but even their concept that it's worth it to do jihad if the deen is going to be lost is because of the precedent set by Imam Hussein. The Sultan is bound by the law on earth. This is very interesting also, that when you are doing Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy anil Munkar, you don't initiate the violence. However, if they do violence against you, you can protect yourself. Meaning he didn't just go there and he didn't go there and say, if you want to crucify me, crucify me. He defended himself. Another one, this a fitna ashaddu min al-qatl, that oppression is worse than death. And that it's very important for any sort of freedom movement or justice movement to be prepared to pay the price. And this is very important, that your life is worth less, because if the life of the greatest of creation is worth less than all of these principles, meaning these principles are worth more than Imam Hussein's life, his children's lives, his brothers' lives, his family's lives. Not just the men, meaning that it's worth it for the women to be captured and taken as prisoner to another place and their wealth be destroyed. All of that is worth less than the deen of Allah. Please give us salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. That They say that when Imam Hussein was finally killed on the battlefield, and we're talking about after they dismembered the body of Imam Hussein, after they chopped up the body of Imam Hussein, after they stripped the body of Imam Hussein, then they trampled the body of Imam Hussein with horses. They took the women as captives. They say one of the little girls, she wasn't in chains, and she started running around the battlefield looking for her daddy. Say, where is my father? Where is my father? Where is my father? And she couldn't tell which one of the bodies was her father because they were headless. And they say that somehow Imam Hussein began to call to her, and then she ran and she sat on the body of Imam Hussein and began hugging him and crying and weeping. How could you do this to my father? How could you do this to my father? How could you do this to my father? The son of the prophet was there by himself, alone, battered. They say that he had over 70 wounds on his body, from spears and swords and arrows and stones. They chopped off one of his arms. To get the ring from his finger, they chopped off his finger. This was the person who Prophet Muhammad used to hug. When Prophet Muhammad used to feel sad, he would go and look at Imam Hussein to cheer up. She was sitting there hugging and crying and crying. And then the soldiers ripped her off of the body of Imam Hussein and put the baby girl in chains and dragged her off to Kufa. سيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. Salawat.